The gravel road eventually dissolved into a rutted track, barely wide enough for my beat-up sedan. Miles of desolate coastline, a blur of gray rock and churning sea, had led me here. My shoulders ached from the drive, but a strange energy coursed through me, a mix of apprehension and fierce anticipation. This was it. The lighthouse. It loomed suddenly, a stark sentinel against the bruised sky, taller and more imposing than any photograph had conveyed. The whitewash was peeling, scarred by decades of salt and wind, revealing patches of rough-hewn stone beneath. The lantern room, perched precariously at its peak, seemed to stare out with a single, unblinking eye. It was magnificent, a testament to raw, enduring power, yet undeniably decaying, its majesty tinged with a profound sadness. My estranged family had kept its existence a secret, tucked away in forgotten legal papers, a property no one had ever spoken of. Now, it was mine. And it was my escape. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the relentless sigh and crash of the waves far below. The air, thick with brine and something else, something ancient and damp, filled my lungs. Stepping out, my boots crunched on scattered shells and pebbles. The wind immediately tugged at my hair, whipping my jacket around me, carrying the raw scent of the ocean. The heavy oak door, weathered almost black, groaned in protest as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was still and cold, heavy with the smell of disuse, dust, damp stone, and a faint, metallic tang I couldn't place. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the flagstone floor of the main living area, a vast, circular space that felt more like a tomb than a home. Light struggled through the grime-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the flickering of my phone's flashlight. This place was immense, far grander and more desolate than I had imagined. I spent the first hour simply walking, exploring the ground floor. A small kitchen, its appliances rusted relics of a bygone era. A study, shelves empty save for a thick layer of dust. And then, a door at the back, tucked away, leading to what appeared to be a utility area. At its end was the laundry room with humming machines. 2 industrial-sized washers and dryers stood like silent sentinels, surprisingly intact amidst the general decay. A low, rhythmic thrum emanated from them, a constant, almost hypnotic vibration that I hadn't noticed from the main living space. It was a mechanical hum, but it had a strange, organic quality to it, like a giant insect trapped within the walls. I ran a hand over the cold metal of one of the dryers. The hum intensified slightly under my touch, a low growl that seemed to resonate through the very floorboards. Just old machinery, I told myself, probably still connected to some ancient, persistent power grid. I paused, tilting my head. Nothing. Just the hum. My imagination, already working overtime in this isolated place. I decided to unpack a few essentials. My duffel bag, heavy with clothes and a few books, felt ridiculously inadequate in the vastness of the main room. As I rummaged for a clean shirt, a distant creak echoed from somewhere above, a long, drawn-out groan that sounded less like settling timber and more like a sigh. I froze, my hands still in the bag. The building was old, I reasoned, prone to strange noises. The wind, too, was picking up, probably rattling a loose pane or shingle. But then the light in the ceiling, a bare bulb I'd screwed in just minutes ago, flickered. Once. Twice. Then held steady. I stared at it, a knot tightening in my stomach. Old wiring, definitely. The place was a ruin, after all. These were just the quirks of an ancient structure. I was alone, miles from anywhere, and my mind was already playing tricks. I needed to be rational. That's why I came here. I went back to the laundry room with humming machines, intending to toss in a load of the clothes I'd driven in. The rhythmic thrum was still there, constant. It was too quick to register, gone. Before I could properly turn my head. I spun around, heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Just the empty, dusty corridor. My breath hitched. Just a trick of the light, I muttered aloud, my voice sounding thin and small in the echoing space. The dust motes, the failing bulb. But the bulb wasn't failing now. I forced myself to focus on the task, loading the clothes into one of the humming machines. The vibration of the floor beneath my feet felt more pronounced now, a subtle tremor that seemed to emanate not from the machines themselves, but from deeper within the structure. It was an unsettling pulse. Everything here was bigger, older, more resonant. As the washer began its cycle, a low, guttural rumble started up from somewhere above, far beyond the laundry room, deeper than the wind. It wasn't the creak of old wood, or the howl of the gale. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones, a slow, building growl that seemed to come from the very stone of the lighthouse itself. It grew louder, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through my teeth, momentarily overpowering the hum of the washing machine. Then, just as suddenly, it ceased. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my breath held tight in my chest. This wasn't just an old building settling. This was something else. The rusted sedan finally shuddered to a halt, nose almost touching the peeling paint of the lighthouse's front door. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic crash of the waves against unseen rocks. My shoulders screamed, but a different kind of ache settled in my chest, an odd mix of apprehension and fierce anticipation. This place, my inheritance, felt less like a home and more like an ancient sentinel, watching me with its blind, vacant windows. The air inside was thick, cold, and smelled of salt, damp stone, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old pennies. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through grimy windows. My footsteps echoed on the flagstone floor as I moved through the main living area. It was Spartan, a sturdy, if scarred, wooden table, a couple of chairs, a heavy iron stove. Everything was coated in a fine, gray powder, undisturbed for years. My initial exploration was methodical. The spiral staircase, cast iron and winding, stretched up into the gloom, a dark mall leading to the lantern room. I postponed that ascent, opting instead for the ground level. A small pantry, mercifully dry, and then, around a corner, I found it, the laundry room with humming machines. 2 industrial-sized washers and dryers, squat and gray, stood like sleeping beasts. They were plugged in, surprisingly, and a low, persistent hum emanated from their dormant guts. It was an unexpected anachronism in this desolate place, a small comfort of modern utility amidst the ancient decay. Someone had kept these running, or at least connected, until very recently. The thought was unsettling. Who and why? Back in the main living space, a small, recessed alcove drew my attention. Hidden behind a heavy, salt-warped door, I discovered what must have been the keeper's office. A battered desk sat against the far wall, its surface littered with loose papers, a faded map of the local coastline, and a stack of thick, leather-bound books. My heart gave a little thump. Log books. I pulled up a creaking chair, sending a cloud of dust into the air, and carefully opened the topmost volume. The first entries were neat, precise, detailing weather conditions, shipping traffic, and routine maintenance. The handwriting was firm, legible, signed with the initial JM. The entries span years, a mundane record of a solitary existence. Then, the script began to shift. The spacing grew erratic, the ink sometimes smudged. October 12th. Fog rolled in thick today. Thought I saw a figure on the rocks, but the mist plays tricks. The solitude presses in. A faint unease stirred in my gut. I flipped pages, drawn deeper into the past. November 3rd comes with the tide, a low thrumming. Under the water. It's not the sea. It's trying to tell me something, clawing at the edge of my mind. My brow furrowed. Isolation could do strange things to a person. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. The handwriting devolved into a scrawl. December 19th. The light. The pull of the light. It's not just guiding ships. It draws them in. I can feel its hunger. It wants to consume everything. A shiver traced its way down my spine. Them? January 5th. I hear it scratching in the walls now. It wants me to join it. It wants my eyes to see through the glass. Madness. It's only madness. Trapped. The light consumes. No escape. It knows I am here. My initial determination wavered, replaced by a prickle of unease. The sheer isolation of a lighthouse keeper's life, the endless gray expanse of the sea and sky, it would be enough to break anyone. I walked back towards the main living area, my gaze sweeping over the dust-laden furniture. Was that chair closer to the table than I remembered? I scoffed internally. No, of course not. I was tired. My mind was playing tricks on me now. I started to unpack a small bag, laying out a few essentials on the table. As I bent to retrieve something from my duffel, a faint creak echoed from the top of the spiral staircase. My head snapped up. Nothing. Just the old house settling, I reasoned. The wind probably. This structure had stood against storms for centuries. It was bound to groan. But then, as I turned back to my bag, I felt it. A distinct sensation, like cold air brushing the nape of my neck, even though there was no draft. Not from outside, through a window. But from within the lighthouse itself. I held my breath, listening. Just the distant roar of the ocean, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum still emanating from the laundry room with humming machines down the hall. I knew, with a certainty that unnerved me, that I was not alone. It wasn't a person. My perceptions were already being twisted, just as the last keepers had been. And I had only just arrived. I closed the logbook with a soft thud, the sound amplified in the sudden silence of the room. I pushed the heavy tome back onto the shelf, the leather cover cool beneath my fingertips. It was just a story, a morbid fantasy born of solitude. I walked out of the lamp room, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. I distinctly remembered turning the brass key in its lock an hour ago, a deliberate click and scrape that always confirmed its security. But as I reached for the handle to test it, my fingers brushed against cold metal. The door wasn't fully latched. It sat ajar by a hair's breadth, a sliver of darkness visible between the frame and the heavy oak. My brow furrowed. I must have forgotten. A simple oversight. I'd left my favorite chipped mug on the counter beside the kettle after making tea this morning. Now, it wasn't there. I scanned the counter, then the sink, a mild annoyance bubbling up. Had I put it in the dishwasher? No, I'd only used it once. I checked the small drying rack, then the cupboard where I kept the other mugs. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up and grab a fresh one, my gaze snagged on the small, dusty shelf above the pantry door, a place I hadn't touched since I moved in. There it sat, my chipped mug, nestled amongst some old, brittle cookbooks. I had never, not once, put anything up there. My hands were steady as I reached for it, but the air felt suddenly thick, pressing in. I needed a distraction, something mundane to anchor me back to reality. Laundry. That was it. I gathered a small pile of clothes and descended into the lower levels of the lighthouse, following the narrow, winding stairs down past the living quarters. The air grew damp and heavy the further I went, carrying a faint, briny scent that clung to the stone walls. Finally, I reached the laundry room with humming machines. The low thrum of the washing machine, already halfway through a cycle, vibrated through the concrete floor. The dryer sat silent next to it, a hulking metal beast. The air here was thick with the scent of sea salt and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old rust mixed with stagnant water. I opened the dryer, pulling out the previous load of towels. It was too indistinct to make out, like a distant conversation heard through a closed door, but it had a familiar cadence. My heart gave a tiny, involuntary jump. I paused, listening intently. The hum of the machine was constant, a low, mechanical drone. Nothing else. Just my imagination, playing tricks in the isolated quiet. This time, it felt closer, clearer, twisting itself around the machine's thrum. It sounded like my own name. Grant. But drawn out, warped, like a mournful sigh carried on a sea wind. And then, woven into it, a memory. A snippet of an argument with my father, years ago, on a dock somewhere. His voice, sharp and dismissive, "You'll never amount to anything, Grant. Just like the rest of them." The words were clear, shockingly vivid, but distorted, elongated, as if spoken underwater. That memory, that precise phrasing, it wasn't something I thought about often, not in years. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the lingering echo. The laundry room with humming machines felt suddenly stifling, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on me. I finished loading the washer, slamming the door shut perhaps a little too forcefully. The sound echoed unnaturally. I turned to leave, my gaze sweeping across the room. That's when I saw it. It was there, then gone, leaving only the dull sheen of the dryer. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. My pulse was a frantic flutter beneath my ribs. I was tired. I hadn't been sleeping well since I arrived. The logbook, the isolation, it was getting to me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. They were a chorus now, a cacophony of overlapping voices, all speaking my name, twisting fragments of my past. My mother's worried tone, the nervous laughter of a colleague I hadn't seen in years, the biting sarcasm of an old teacher. Each voice, each word, stretched and distorted, like taffy pulled thin, then snapped. I clutched the rough stone banister, my knuckles white. This wasn't isolation. This wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was something else. Something in this lighthouse was actively reaching into my memories, twisting them, throwing them back at me. It was a cruel, intimate invasion. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the very air was watching me, waiting. The determination I'd arrived with was now a brittle shell, threatening to crack under the relentless pressure of an unseen, unheard tormentor. But the words, the frantic scrawl, the chilling consistency across decades, it wasn't just a series of breakdowns. There was a pattern. A hunger. No. I wasn't going to let my mind play tricks on me. This place was old, decaying. It wasn't. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floorboards. The decision was made. Not tomorrow, not in a few days, but now. My mundane life, the one I'd been so desperate to escape, suddenly seemed like a sun-drenched paradise. I just needed to pack a bag, grab my keys, and drive away. Head for the nearest town, find a motel, and think. Process. Reassure myself that I was sane and this old structure was just a collection of bricks and glass. I hurried down the winding stairs, my footsteps echoing. I could hear the wind picking up outside, a low moan at first, then a rising shriek. That was normal, I told myself. Coastal weather was unpredictable. Reaching the ground floor, I moved swiftly towards the small utility room where my phone had been charging. A colleague, a distant relative. Just to hear a normal voice, to ground myself in reality. No service. I tried again, moving it to different spots near the window. Nothing. The signal, usually intermittent but present, was completely gone. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed against the tower, rattling the thick glass of the lantern room high above. I glanced out the narrow window. The sky, which had been merely overcast a moment ago, was now a bruised, churning purple-black. The sea, previously a restless gray, had transformed into a raging beast, waves crashing against the rocks with terrifying force, sending spray high into the air. This wasn't just a storm. This was too fast, too sudden, too angry. I snatched my car keys from the hook by the door. I had to try. Even if the phone was dead, I could still drive. The track leading to the main road wasn't long, maybe a mile. I could make it. Pushing open the heavy oak door that led outside, I was almost ripped from my feet. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at my clothes, whipping my hair into my eyes. Rain, thick and icy, immediately plastered itself to my face, stinging. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Through the swirling chaos, I could just make out my vehicle, parked precariously close to the cliff edge. It looked like a toy being tossed by an invisible hand. A jagged flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the scene, followed by an ear-splitting crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the lighthouse. The storm wasn't just around the lighthouse, it felt centered on it. The air was thick with salt and something else, a metallic tang, like ozone, but also a deep, briny scent that prickled the back of my throat. I fought against the wind, taking one stumbling step after another towards the car. The gravel beneath my boots was already turning to mud. Another gust hit me, stronger this time, almost knocking me down. I saw a piece of driftwood, thick as my arm, lifted from the beach and hurled past me with lethal speed. This was madness. I wouldn't make it 10 feet. My car would be swept away, or I'd be struck by flying debris, or simply blown over the cliff. I was trapped. I turned, struggling to pull the heavy door shut against the gale. It groaned, resisting, then slammed home with a shuddering thud that echoed through the tower. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold them still. The lighthouse was no longer a refuge, it was a cage. Panic began to set in. Check the generator, secure the windows, find a radio that still worked. I stumbled through the lower levels, my mind racing. The mundane sounds of the lighthouse, usually comforting, were now eerie. I passed the laundry room with humming machines, their steady thrum a bizarre counterpoint to the raging tempest outside. The quiet, rhythmic whirring of the dryer, the slosh of the washer, felt utterly alien in the face of the encroaching chaos. It was a small, absurd anchor to a reality that was rapidly dissolving. I continued into a small storage area I hadn't properly explored, a dusty space behind the main living quarters, filled with old fishing gear and rusty tools. My hands, still trembling, brushed against a section of the wall that felt different. Not rough stone, like the rest, but smooth, almost polished. I ran my fingers over it, tracing a faint seam. It was a wooden panel, cleverly disguised, almost flush with the wall. With a surge of desperate energy, I pushed. Inside, tucked away on a small, cobweb-laden shelf, was another book. The wax bore an imprint, a crude, almost childish drawing of a single, watchful eye. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was what the keepers had been hiding. My fingers fumbled with the brittle wax, breaking the seal with a dry crack. The leather cover peeled open, revealing pages filled with a dense, almost microscopic script, even more frantic and desperate than the previous entries. Always. From the deep. It draws them in, the lonely ones, the broken ones. Their despair is its beacon. This light, this tower, it is not a guide. It is a lure. A trap. My eyes scan frantically, skipping lines, devouring phrases. It feeds on the echoes of their sorrow. It binds them here, their minds twisted, their souls consumed. I tried to fight it. To turn the light away. But it is stronger. It is ancient. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted, it was a living, breathing maw. And I, in my foolish quest for escape, had walked right into its gaping mouth. The storm wasn't natural. It wasn't. Holding me here. Ensuring I became just another echo. Another lonely soul for its timeless vigil. The realization had settled over me like a shroud woven from sea mist and dread. The lighthouse wasn't just old stone and rusted iron, it was an organ, a gullet, a trap. And I, in my naive search for something more, had walked right into its gaping mouth. The storm wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was it, holding me here, ensuring I became just another echo, another lonely soul for its timeless vigil. My breath hitched in my throat, each inhale a conscious effort against the invisible pressure. I tried to move, to shake off the creeping paralysis, but my limbs felt weighted, my joints stiff as if I'd been standing still for days. How long had I been standing there, staring at the swirling chaos outside the lantern room glass? Time had begun to stretch and snap, elastic and unpredictable. Hours could pass in what felt like minutes, or a single minute could drag on, an eternity of mounting terror. The rough texture was a small, grounding comfort, a reminder that some things were still solid, still real. But even that comfort was fleeting. The stone seemed to shift beneath my fingers, the spiral an endless descent, each step echoing not just my own tread, but a chorus of faint, shuffling noises that seemed to rise from the depths of the structure. Were they coming from below, or were they just in my head? I couldn't tell. The line between external reality and internal nightmare was blurring, fraying like an old rope under constant strain. A dull, insistent thrumming drew me lower, down to a level I hadn't spent much time in. The sound grew louder, more rhythmic, as I pushed open a heavy wooden door. Inside, the air was warm and humid, smelling faintly of bleach and damp fabric. I was in the laundry room with humming machines. 3 industrial-sized washing machines and 2 dryers were arrayed against one wall, their steel drums silent now, but the low, continuous hum of their dormant motors filled the enclosed space. It was a sound I recognized, a mundane sound, yet here, it was subtly wrong. It vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, settling in my chest like a parasitic insect. The hum seemed to intensify as I touched it, a low growl that resonated with the storm outside. My reflection stared back at me in the polished steel door, but it wasn't quite right. A flicker of movement caught my eye just behind my reflected shoulder. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, eyes wide and fixed, brimming with an unbearable sorrow. Then, in a blink, it was gone, replaced by my own contorted image, the hum of the machines now a throbbing pulse in my ears. Just tired. But the voices began then. You're alone, Grant. Always have been. You sought escape, didn't you? But all you found was a larger cage. A tomb. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The humming of the machines seemed to morph, rising and falling like a distorted chant. I could almost hear words in the mechanical drone, a guttural language I couldn't comprehend, yet understood on a primal level. It was saying my name. Twisting it, elongating it into something monstrous. I pushed myself away from the machines, needing to get out, needing air that didn't taste of despair. The walls of the laundry room, once solid and unremarkable, now felt like they were pressing in, the ceiling a little lower, the corners closing in on me. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to claw at the plaster, to tear it down, to break free. A flicker at the edge of my vision again. Another echo. Another victim. They all came here looking for something, Grant. And they all found the same thing. Oblivion. The voice was closer now, not in my head, but resonating through the very stones of the lighthouse. It was the sound of the wind, the crash of waves, the groan of old timber, all coalescing into a single, malevolent presence. It knew my regrets. It knew my failures. I pressed my hands over my ears, desperate to block out the relentless assault. But the voices were inside, behind my eyes, beneath my skin. They were no longer just words, they were sensations. The icy grip of loneliness, the bitter taste of regret, the crushing weight of isolation. This place wasn't just influencing my perceptions, it was invading my very being, dismantling my mind piece by piece. The lighthouse wasn't just a prison, it was a living entity, and it was slowly, meticulously, consuming me. I could feel its tendrils reaching, probing, finding the rawest nerves, the deepest fears. I was trapped, not just by the storm, but by the relentless, insidious creep of madness. And it had only just begun. It was everywhere. My regrets, my failures, they weren't just being whispered, they were being woven, threads of shame and missed chances tightening around me, binding me to this place. I stumbled back, my hands flying up as if to ward off an invisible assailant. The air itself felt thick, buzzing with an unseen energy, charged with something ancient and hateful. I needed to get away, just for a moment, to break the hold. My legs felt like lead, but I forced one foot in front of the other, blindly retreating down the spiral stairs. Each step was a battle against the suffocating presence that pressed in, amplifying every doubt, every insecurity I'd ever harbored. The familiar chill of the lighthouse interior felt different now, colder, deeper, a bone-deep gnawing that had nothing to do with the sea wind. I don't know how I ended up there, but suddenly I was pushing through the heavy door to the laundry room with humming machines. The industrial-sized washers and dryers, squat and utilitarian, rumbled and whirred, creating a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor. The air here was warm, damp, smelling faintly of detergent and stale moisture, a smell I usually found comforting in its ordinariness. Now, it was just another layer, another sensory input for whatever had its hooks in me. The hum was relentless, a dull, mechanical drone that seemed to mirror the thrumming in my own skull. But it was no use. The laundry room, far from being a sanctuary, became a stage. The rhythmic thumping of a dryer full of wet linens began to morph, to take on a different rhythm, a primal beat. Then, the world around me shimmered. The dull gray walls of the laundry room wavered, dissolving like smoke. I wasn't in the lighthouse anymore. Not truly. I stood on a desolate shore under a sky the color of bruised plums. It pulsed with a faint, malevolent light, a sickly green luminescence that seemed to draw the very light from the world around it. A figure emerged from the mist, indistinct at first, then solidifying into a man. He stumbled towards the spire, drawn by an invisible thread, his hand outstretched as if reaching for salvation, or perhaps offering himself up. As he neared the pulsating rock, the green light intensified, wrapping around him like tendrils. His form distorted, stretched, his cries silent to me but echoing in the terrifying vastness of the vision. He didn't just die, he dissolved, his essence pulled into the rock, becoming part of its malevolent glow. The scene shifted. Again, a man, different face, different era, but the same drawn, haunted expression. This time, a crude beacon fire blazed atop the spire. He tended it, his movements slow, mechanical, his gaze fixed on the endless, empty sea. Loneliness radiated from him, a palpable despair that saturated the very air. The green light pulsed, feeding on it, growing brighter, stronger. And then, he too, was consumed, his form flickering like a dying flame before vanishing into the rock. Keeper after keeper. Century after century. The faces changed, the clothing evolved, the methods of light-keeping advanced from fire to oil lamps, then to the intricate lens I had discovered. But the story was always the same. Each man, isolated, adrift in their own sorrows, their own failures, drawn to this place. Each man, slowly, inexorably, succumbing to the creeping despair, their sanity eroded, their will broken. And each man, finally, absorbed their life force, their very being, adding to the ancient, insatiable hunger of the entity. It was primordial. It didn't just live in the lighthouse, it was the lighthouse. The structure was merely its anchor, its physical manifestation, a beacon not for ships, but for souls. It fed on the raw, potent despair of loneliness, the gnawing emptiness that only isolation could breed. And it was ancient, immeasurably old, a patient predator that had waited for millennia, simply existing, consuming. Then the vision focused on a specific point in time. The construction of this lighthouse, my lighthouse. The men who built it, their faces grim, their movements heavy. They didn't know what they were building upon, what they were sealing within its walls. They just built, and the entity waited, a silent, ancient parasite ready to claim its new, grander vessel. And then, the final, crushing blow. I saw myself, a phantom, tending the lamp, my movements slow, my gaze blank, my essence already fading into the green glow. I saw myself becoming another part of it, another whisper in the stone, another echo in the wind. The roar in my ears intensified, a triumphant, hungry sound. The vision flickered, the edges blurring, and the laundry room with humming machines began to bleed back into my awareness. I pushed myself off the machine, my legs trembling. The humming of the washers and dryers now sounded like a mocking chorus, a mechanical heartbeat of the thing that had just revealed itself. I understood now. Every keeper. Every single one. They hadn't just died, they had been consumed. Their despair had been the feast, their souls the fuel. And I, Grant, was destined to be next. I was trapped. This wasn't just a house, it was a tomb, and I was already halfway inside. My regrets, my failures, they weren't just being whispered, they were being breathed into every molecule of the lighthouse. It was a suffocating shroud, thick with the damp chill of the sea and the acrid tang of something ancient and foul. For a moment, I just stood there, swaying, feeling the foundation shift beneath me as if the entire structure was exhaling a sigh of deep, malevolent satisfaction. My knees buckled. The world tilted. The familiar spiral of the stairs seemed to twist into an impossible helix, the light from the lantern room above a mocking, distant eye. This wasn't just an echo anymore. It was a presence, vast and hungry, and it was here. It was finally here, and it wanted me. It wanted to twist me into another one of its silent, broken keepers. But then, something inside me snapped. Not broke, but tightened. A thread of stubborn refusal, thin as a spider silk, but unyielding. I wouldn't be another one. I wouldn't let it win. Despair had been a comfortable cloak, a familiar companion, but this was different. This was an active, consuming evil, and I wouldn't surrender. I couldn't. My mind, despite the roaring chaos that now filled it, started to claw for purchase. I couldn't run. Where would I go? The sea was its domain, and the land, what little there was just a prelude to its reach. My only option was to fight. To destroy it. To sever its connection, whatever that connection was. I needed a plan. I stumbled down the winding stairs, each step a jarring impact against my already frayed nerves. A faint, rhythmic thrumming reached me, a sound I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. It felt like a heartbeat, or perhaps the grinding of stone on stone deep below. I squinted into the gloom, my hand trailing along the damp wall. Mine. I found myself descending into the belly of the lighthouse, the lowest levels I rarely visited. The thrumming grew louder, more insistent. It vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my legs, settling in my chest like a parasitic thing. And then I was there, the laundry room with humming machines. 2 monstrous, ancient industrial washers and a dryer, relics from a time when the lighthouse had a full staff. They sat silent now, but the low hum I'd been hearing was emanating from the massive electrical panel on the wall beside them. It pulsed, a low, resonant throb, as if struggling to contain an immense, unseen power. The air was warm and humid, heavy with the ghost of detergents and damp linen. It felt wrong, utterly out of place, yet terrifyingly real. "This is where it keeps its things," a voice hissed, right beside my ear. But there was no one there. The sound of the hum drowned out my gasp. I stared at the thick, braided cables disappearing into the floor. This wasn't just power for the machines. This was something else. This was the artery. The hum was the blood flow. The lighthouse was it. Or at least, an extension of it. Its root, its anchor. Destroy the structure, destroy the anchor. A desperate, reckless idea began to form. Fire. Explosives. Something to bring the whole rotten edifice down, but what? I had no explosives. But fire. There were old oil drums in the storage room upstairs, remnants of the old lamp fuel. Enough to cause significant damage if I could get it to ignite properly. As I turned to leave the laundry room, the large, heavy steel door, which had been slightly ajar, swung shut with a deafening clang. It echoed in the small, humid space, making me jump. I lunged for the handle, twisting it frantically. It was stuck. Locked. I rattled it, pulling with all my might, but it wouldn't budge. A physical barrier. The entity was actively working against me. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I kicked the door, then slammed my shoulder into it, grunting with effort. Nothing. The humming of the electrical panel seemed to intensify, mocking me. The sickly sweet smell grew stronger, making my stomach churn. Then the illusions began. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but they remained. I won't. I wouldn't die trapped in this humid, humming tomb. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, anything. There had to be. My plan, however desperate, was still my only hope. I just had to get to those oil drums. And I had to fight. The entity had made its move. Now, it was my turn. It was thick, almost chewable, carrying the faint, metallic scent of heated water and something else, something ancient and briny, like the deepest parts of the ocean floor stirred to life. My head swam with it, a dizzying percussion that made my teeth ache. "I won't break," I whispered, the words raspy in my throat, swallowed almost immediately by the mechanical din. My voice sounded alien, fragile. I wouldn't die trapped in this place, this humid, humming tomb. My eyes darted around, scanning the room's limited expanse. The grimy porcelain sinks, the stacked baskets overflowing with stained rags, the metal shelving units crammed with industrial-sized detergents. And there, in the far corner, partially obscured by a towering washing machine, were the oil drums. My only hope. Every muscle in my body screamed, a symphony of exhaustion and terror, but a raw, desperate resolve burned brighter than any pain. This was it. The showdown. I took a shaky step, then another, towards the drums. The air immediately thickened around me, as if I were moving through water. The hum of the machines intensified, rising in pitch, becoming a shrill whine that clawed at my eardrums. "You are alone." The thought wasn't mine. It was a voice that held no inflection, only the weight of eons of despair. My knees buckled slightly, but I forced myself upright. "No," I growled, pushing the word out. "I'm not." The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple, the concrete warping and shifting in my peripheral vision, though when I looked directly, it was solid, unyielding. My balance wavered. Then came the visions. Not full, immersive scenes, but flashes, like broken shards of glass. A man, his face gaunt and covered in salt spray, staring blankly at the churning sea. This was its currency, its food. My isolation, my fear, my growing madness. I pushed forward, my hand reaching out, bracing myself against the cool metal casing of a dryer. The machine vibrated violently, the internal drum rattling as if something was trapped inside, struggling to get out. The noise was deafening, a frantic, metallic clatter that merged with the high-pitched whine. The air around me crackled, charged with an invisible, malevolent energy. Give up. There is no escape. There never was. The voice was louder now, a reverberation in my very bones, twisting my own memories against me. My mundane life, my estranged family, the quiet desperation that had driven me to this forgotten place, it all flooded back, amplified, distorted, making every choice seem pointless, every effort futile. This wasn't just a mental attack, it was an assault on my identity, an attempt to dissolve Grant, to leave only an empty vessel for its eternal vigil. My head throbbed, a relentless drum solo behind my eyes. I could feel its tendrils, not physical, but psychic, probing, seeking purchase in the fragile architecture of my mind. It wanted to twist the wires, short-circuit my will, but I wasn't. Not yet. I stumbled, catching myself on a stack of laundry baskets. The plastic groaned under my weight. The oil drums were closer now, just a few more feet. Each step was an Everest. The entity intensified its assault, a swirling vortex of ancient malevolence and despair. This was the lighthouse's legacy. This was what it did. You are merely another. A link in the chain. I understood then, with a horrifying clarity, that this wasn't just about my life. It was about its life, its endless, parasitic existence. It wasn't just in the lighthouse, it was the lighthouse, its consciousness woven into the very stone, feeding on the despair of every keeper, every soul drawn to its desolate beacon. My family hadn't just abandoned the place, they had escaped it, or perhaps, simply failed to break its grip. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, staggering me. But instead of breaking me, it ignited a new, furious spark. This wasn't just for me, it was for all of them. For the nameless, forgotten keepers whose minds had been scoured clean. No! I roared, the sound ripped from the deepest part of my gut, a defiant, ragged cry against the overwhelming psychic force. It was real. It was tangible. This was my chance. My only chance. It wasn't just in the lighthouse. The words had resonated through me, not as sound, but as an understanding, cold and absolute, that settled into my bones. The entity, the thing that had haunted this tower, this coast, wasn't merely present here. It was the vigil, the unending watch, and it had found a new, more intimate way to persist. The immediate aftermath was a blur of exhaustion. I remember the silence that followed, a deeper, more profound quiet than any I'd ever known. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the cessation of presence. Vanished. I had slumped against the cold stone, breathing in ragged gasps, my mind a blank slate scraped clean by terror. I didn't know what I'd done, or what had been done to me, but the immediate threat, the suffocating pressure, had lifted. Days bled into a week. I moved through the lighthouse like a ghost in my own home, jumpy, hyper-aware. Every creak of the old timbers, every slap of the waves against the base, made me flinch. I cleaned. I scrubbed. I polished the brass until it gleamed, a frantic attempt to scour away the lingering taint, to impose order on a world that had utterly rejected it. I ate little, slept less, plagued by dreams of an endless, churning blackness punctuated by a single, unwavering beam of light. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a predator, sated and patient. One afternoon, I found myself in the laundry room with humming machines. The industrial washers and dryers, relics from a time when the lighthouse had a full crew, rumbled with a low, steady thrum. I was feeding my clothes into one of the cavernous machines, the mundane task a desperate anchor to reality. The smell of detergent was sharp, clean, almost medicinal, a stark contrast to the salt and decay that clung to the rest of the structure. I watched the clothes tumble through the glass door, a hypnotic swirl of fabric and suds. The humming of the machines filled the small room, a mechanical lullaby. And then I noticed it. It wasn't a sound or a sight, not directly. It was a feeling. A subtle pressure, not on my skin, but behind my eyes, like a gentle, persistent push. I blinked, rubbed my temples, convinced it was just fatigue. But it didn't recede. I leaned against the dryer, trying to steady myself. My gaze fell upon my reflection in the polished chrome of the machine's control panel. But something else was there. A flicker. Deep within my pupils, a faint, almost imperceptible pinprick of light. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes. The light didn't vanish. It was there, a tiny, steady ember, deep within the black of my eye. And it wasn't just in one eye. Both. My breath hitched. My mind, still reeling from the previous encounter, struggled to make sense of this new horror. It was too small, too faint to be anything supernatural, surely. A delusion. But then, the humming of the machines. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It felt connected. The low thrumming resonated with the pressure behind my eyes, with the faint glow. My own heartbeat seemed to fall into sync with the mechanical drone, a deep, unsettling vibration that settled in my chest. I pushed away from the dryer, stumbling back, my hands flying to my eyes. I pressed hard, trying to extinguish the tiny lights, to dispel the feeling, but they persisted. When I opened my eyes again, the pinpricks were still there, unwavering. The entity hadn't been defeated. It hadn't merely retreated. It had found its ultimate sanctuary. It was no longer in the lighthouse. It was of the lighthouse. And now, it was of me. The silence wasn't the absence of presence, it was the presence within. The entity had burrowed in, intertwined itself with my very being. The immediate threat was gone because I was no longer an obstacle. I was the host. I was the new vessel. I walked to the small, grimy window of the laundry room and looked out at the churning sea. The beam, bright and resolute, cut through the encroaching dusk. The pressure behind my eyes intensified with each sweep, a rhythmic ebb and flow. I raised a trembling hand and touched my face. My skin felt thin, like a membrane. I was no longer Grant, the man who had sought escape in this remote tower. I was something else. I was the keeper, yes, but not in the way I'd ever understood it. I was the new lens, the new beacon. The entity's timeless vigil had merely found a new pair of eyes through which to see, a new mind through which to endlessly observe the lonely, unforgiving sea. The lighthouse hummed. The laundry room with humming machines hummed. And now, so did I. The cycle wasn't broken. It had simply found a new, more insidious way to continue. And I, Grant, was now its eternal, unwilling participant. I was the light. And the light would never go out.